Welcome, everybody. My name is Nick Knutson. I'm the Executive Director at DemCast USA. And now we've got everybody. Really excited to have everybody here. DemCast, for those of you who don't know, or maybe who haven't joined our democracy briefings in the past, DemCast is a 501c4 nonprofit organization dedicated to lifting the voices of regular people in the digital space and helping to empower people to use their social media accounts specifically to spread strategic messaging that helps to build our movement and help it prosper. We just before we get going, I can't not let you know because it's cool. We had a like I said, we're a nonprofit. We had a donor very generously offer up $22,000 match to help us down the stretch in the 2022 Mobilize for Midterms campaign. So we're hoping to make the most use of that. So any spare change in the couch cushions that you can find, I just dropped the link into chat. So thanks for helping us get there. If you have any cents, nickels, and dollars to spare. So enough of the org stuff. We came here to talk about extremism and the GOP extremism and how to fight it. And we have three amazing guests who have really unique perspectives on doing that. As we go here, and we'll introduce them here, and then we'll start kicking in the conversation. As we go, if you have questions, try not to put them in chat. Try to put them in the Q&A. Use the Q&A button because the chat moves really fast, so it helps us keep track of the questions that people have. You can ask specific questions for specific guests, or if you just have a general question that you'd like for any or all of them to chime in on. We're going to try and save some time for that toward the end. So without further ado, why don't we head into intros here?
Well, first up, we have Darlene McDonald. I'll admit, a little bit partial to Darlene. She has been a good friend for many years now. But Darlene has served as outreach director for the Utah Women's Democratic Club, the oldest women's democratic club in the country. And she has also been on the board for the Alliance for Better Utah. In 2019, she was elected chair of the Utah Black Roundtable. And in 2020, she was elected to serve as the Democratic National Committee woman for Utah. Following all of the protests after the murder of George Floyd, Darlene was one of 6 community leaders appointed by the mayor to serve on the Salt Lake City Racial Equity and Policing Commission. And she has demonstrated that when she's called to serve, she shows up and provides a necessary voice for issues on race, racism, and the importance of diversity. And she is running in Utah's Congressional District 4 against Burgess Owens.
Awesome. Welcome, Darlene. Our next guest is Rochelle Garza. I know that I'm really excited, and I'm not from Texas, but we do have a very, very strong DemCast Texas contingent who is very excited to have her on this call. Rochelle Garza is a fronteriza, an attorney and a lifelong fighter for the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. She spent her career fighting for the civil rights of children, immigrants, and families. Rochelle has taken on Justice Brett Kavanaugh when, as a federal judge, he decided against Jane Doe, a teen in immigration detention who was denied the right to choose. Her work on that case resulted in the Garza Notice, which requires that detained teens be notified of their right to abortion free of retaliation and obstruction by the federal government. She graduated from the University of Houston Law Center and from Brown University with honors. She lives in Brownsville with her husband, Adam, their daughter, and their dog, Ramses. And Lori's going to introduce David.
Welcome, Rochelle. I just have to put in a quick agreement. My maiden name is Rochelle, so I feel like I have to just, you got one extra like plug from me. And I am thrilled to be introducing David Roth. David was raised in Southeast Idaho. He currently lives in the same neighborhood he grew up in, where he is raising his two sons adopted from foster care. He is the executive director of the Bonneville Youth Development Council, a nonprofit focused on youth substance use prevention. He also sits on the board of Community Coalitions of Idaho, Habitat for Humanity Idaho Falls, and the Idaho Falls Soup Kitchen. He is the former chair of the Bonneville County Democratic Party. David is a member of the LGBTQ community, and in fact is the first openly gay man to receive statewide nomination in the state of Idaho. He is also only the second openly gay man to ever be nominated to the U.S. Senate by a major party. He believes that it is time for all of us to stand up, be visible, and make our voices heard. Welcome, David.
Welcome, all of you. I mean, wow, what a fantastic panel of guests. Thank you all for joining us, and we want to treat this kind of as a panel, where you guys can kind of take turns. We've got some prompts, but hopefully this can be a discussion around the topic at hand here. But just to kick off, just to give people a little bit more context, we've read your bios, but why don't you each just tell us a little bit about yourself, why you're running, what brought you to run for office, and sort of where you are in your race right now. And maybe we could start with Rochelle.
Sure. Well, thank you all so much for having me on. It's really something to be in this space with other folks from other states that are fighting for our democracy and fighting for what's right. I'm Rochelle Garza. I'm originally from South Texas. I grew up on the border with Mexico in the Rio Grande Valley. I'm a fifth generation Texan. I'm a mom to a now 5-month-old baby, and I'm running against Ken Paxton, who is not only under criminal indictment, but also tried to overturn the 2020 election. And I am within 2 points of unseating him in the state of Texas. I'm the first Latina to ever be nominated for this position, and when elected, I will be the first woman and the first Latina to ever serve in this role. And I'm running because I want to make sure that we are taking care of families, that we are taking care of Texans, and we are protecting our democracy.
Fantastic. David, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I'm David Roth. It's actually Roth, but I always tell people, call me whatever you like, just check my name on the box. I grew up here in Idaho, and I've seen my state change dramatically over time. I spent time living in other states and then came back. And I'm concerned about what the future holds for my children. I have 2 boys that I adopted, and so that was really what got me to run, because I'm concerned about what the future looks like in the state that I live in, and also what the future looks like in the country that we live in. Idaho tends to be the birthplace for a lot of really horrible laws and legislations. We were the birthplace of the anti-trans sports bill. We have some of the worst abortion laws in the country now. And I just felt that no one was really taking a stand against those issues. And so I decided to run. I had actually the only contested statewide primary in the whole state on the Democratic side. Democrats don't really run here. And I still managed to pull off almost 60% of the vote. So yeah, I mean, I just feel that we're at a point where we have to stand up and we have to start pushing back, because things are just getting worse. So that's why I decided to run.
Well, thank you for running. Darlene.
Thank you very much, DemCast, Nick and Jamie and Lloyd, for having me on. So I'm Darlene McDonald, and I'm running for Congressional District 4 against incumbent Representative Burgess Owens. Like Representative Paxton, I believe Rochelle said, he was one of the 147 congressional representative Republicans that did not vote to certify the 2020 election. So he was one of the people who voted to overturn our democratically held elections. Why I decided to run, the first thing that comes to my mind when I say that is representation matters. And that is making sure that you have people, at least a representative, who will show up for everyone within the community. And that means everyone, whether they vote for you or not. And I know that the former President Barack Obama used to say that a lot. We're not a red state, red America or blue America. We are the United States of America. One of his very famous lines from his when he was a senator, actually. I think it was a 1984 Democratic, 2004, when it was John Kerry, when he made that statement. And it was representation matters, but also, as others have said, making sure that we protect our democracy. This is something that I know that everyone holds true and holds dear to their hearts. But being someone, for myself, an African-American woman, in having parents and ancestry that worked during the civil rights movement and worked really hard to ensure that we had an America that was representative of the entire United States of America. This country and what we have built here, and having ancestors that were slaves that helped build this country, it is important to me that we fight for American democracy and not hand it over to the extremists to take us back 100 years, 200 years, which is where we are headed. And it is important that we call it out every single time. And I know that they like to say, oh, now you're saying fascism and everything is fascist. Well, it is. And if you Google it, if you look at a dictionary, it is what it is. And it is important that we fight back and we fight for the American democracy. And we also fight against disinformation. That is why I am running, because truth matters. And I know Colonel Alexander Vindman said that so perfectly and eloquently in his congressional hearing, in the first impeachment hearing. Truth matters, right matters. And that is why I've decided to jump into this race, into this very heavily gerrymandered race, because it is important that we show up and we fight for our democracy.
Well, kind of the perfect segue into our next question, because we have certainly seen a pretty dramatic increase on Republicans from their extremist views. They're specifically targeting the people that are running that are on this call. LGBTQ population, people of color. How challenging has that been for you guys? In the way, how has it affected your race, especially because you guys really are on the front line of these attacks right now?
You want to go first? Okay.
I can go first. I mean, I think that these types of attacks are always against people that don't have as much political power. And the erosion of civil rights always begins with the folks that are the most marginalized. So that's why it's important for folks like us to step up and to run for office. I mentioned earlier that I'm from South Texas. I'm from the border region. And if you know anything about us, you probably think of family separation and what happened under the Trump administration, or you think about all of the ugly narrative on the border region itself. We are a very beautiful region that is very culturally rich, but we also struggle with poverty. And that is the same experience for lots of people across the state of Texas. People that don't have access to healthcare. And Texas is in a bad situation right now. We have leadership that would rather try to take trans children from their parents, that would want to criminalize doctors for providing abortion care, and take away, attack businesses that are trying to help people leave the state in order to have access to a very basic health care, or even ensure that people will die if they need health care. So it's a bad situation, but that's why it's important to have representation. This is where it matters. The state of Texas is 60% people of color. Nearly 40% of the state are Latino, and yet I am the only woman, Latina on the executive side of the statewide ticket, Democrat or Republican. Representation absolutely matters, and that's where we can make these changes, because we understand our communities, we understand what's at stake, and we can focus in on the things that are going to uplift everyone and stop these attacks. That is the most important thing that we can do as candidates, as people, is to stand up and fight for these positions that have such great importance. I didn't really get into what the Attorney General does, but the Attorney General is the top law enforcement officer of the state of Texas, and can make or break civil rights. And right now, Ken Paxton is using his office to take away rights, not just from Texans, but from the rest of the country. That was his intention when he tried to challenge the 2020 election, when he's, enforced the 6-week abortion ban and the bounty hunter scheme, and now the total ban on abortion. He wants to take that not just to the state, but across the country. So all of these races are very critical, but we need to start paying attention to what's happening in the states in order to make some change.
I would like to jump in, because a lot of what you just said really hit home for me. Being on the front lines, and what does that mean for us? There was once upon a time, Democrats very seldom would actually say the word abortion. Wouldn't say it. It was political suicide to even say the word abortion, and would run away from it as fast as they could, especially Democrats that were in red states, as we are in. But what happened? What happened with the Supreme Court, and no one can really say they didn't see this coming. We saw this coming for years. When the Supreme Court made the Dodd v. Jackson decision, and now everyone is actually saying out loud the word abortion, because finally, some people get that abortion is healthcare. And they get that because you have women who are pregnant, who may have miscarried, and are being forced to carry an unviable fetus around and may lose their lives as a result. There are 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, victims of rape or sexual abuse or incest, may be forced to carry, if they can, carry a pregnancy to term at 10. And this is something that was talked about very silently. Very silently. People wouldn't say it out loud. But now, since that right has been taken away, and the choice has been taken away, the freedom has been taken away, people are now saying out loud the word abortion and why it was legalized in the first place, to save the lives of women. That was the reason why it was legalized in 1973. We are running against extremism here in Utah. We actually have 3 African Americans, which is wow, 3 Utah, right? 3 African Americans running for Congress at the same time. in Utah. And this is also the same time where we see an increase in racism. We just had a national incident that occurred at BYU University last week, where a Duke University volleyball player was called the N-word throughout the entire volleyball game, and no one said anything. This is happening over and over and over again in the state of Utah. And our congressional delegation has said nothing. They've said absolutely nothing. When a 10-year-old died by suicide, who is going to stand up and stand with those people if our federal representation won't do it? I have been one of the people that have shown up, that have reached out to the families of the children that have been harmed and bullied, racially bullied, or just bullied on school buses and classrooms, and just say, you are not alone. We stand with you. And representation matters, even if you are 2% of the population. And that is what's happening here in Utah. The Black population here is 2%. So I guess that means they don't deserve representation. They don't deserve to have the federal representatives stand up for them, because maybe is it politically unpopular to stand up for people who are 2% of the population? I don't know what it is. But representation means showing up for everyone. And I got into the race for those who are on the margins as well, to bring everyone in and say, you matter, you deserve representation, and you have to have someone who will stand with you.
Thank you.
David,
Alrighty.
you want to jump in?
I will. So I will just be quick. I mean, I live in Idaho, and many of you saw we make the news with some regularity. We had the infamous U-Haul 31 of the people showing up at the North Idaho Pride Festival. We have sitting members of our legislature calling for the execution of people in the LGBT community. We have a pastor in our state who regularly preaches on how LGBT people should be drawn out into the street and killed for nothing else than being who we are. It's one of the reasons it was very important to run, because I believe that, as everyone else has said, representation absolutely does matter. And one of the things that I've been able to do, well, I should say some of the things that target against me, I mean, obviously there's the standard things that the extremists always do. I mean, the threats and those types of things, but it has been really interesting to see the types of things people have come after me for. And I've had to, in my campaign, be much, much more open about my personal life and my children and everything else than I ever would have in any other aspect of my life. Because early on in the race, I decided that if I didn't own this up front and I didn't make it something that I was proud of, it would be construed as something that I was ashamed of, and that it would be used against me. And so as a result, I think I actually have dodged a lot of the worst that could have come, because from the very beginning, I've owned it and been out and proud. It's amazing the representation that does matter running a federal race. I get letters and emails from all around this country talking from kids and families talking about how they're so inspired by what I'm doing, and that if I can do this here in Idaho, and if I can stand up here, that they can stand up in New Jersey and make it to school every day, even though they feel that they're so unwanted and so unloved. And so it's really important. And you know, we had really hoped that we would get some of the attention of like the national groups, like the Victory Fund or the HRC. And it was really surprising in conversations, they're not interested in getting involved in a race in Idaho because they don't think it matters. They don't think we can win. And what's so sad is that it doesn't even matter if we win or not. Just the fact that we're here that we did this, that we stood up and we were willing to say, you know what? It's not okay what's happening. It's not okay the way that people are talking about us, or any group of people, any group of marginalized people. I really feel like we're missing an opportunity there. This is the highest office up for election this year, and to not get that kind of support, it was really disheartening. But people have really stepped up, and one of the things I love about DemCast is you're one of the groups that have really stepped up and said, you know what, we're going to replace the sort of establishment, the people who don't seem to care, and we're going to give voice to people all across this country. And it's been pretty amazing how we have taken off. And I don't care what anyone says. We are a viable race. There was lots of primaries where LGBT candidates ran for the Senate. We were the only one that made it. And we're growing exponentially on social media and everywhere. And so I think they missed the boat to get involved. And I think it's really important that everybody understands that it's not just about winning, it's about the fact that we're here.
Thank you for that, David. Jamie being in Utah, I'm in Tennessee. I know exactly how it feels to kind of be the redheaded stepchild, where they don't want to fund races or going to vote and not having a Democratic candidate to vote for is really deflating. And I, so much from my heart, love the fact that you guys have been willing to step up and run in a hard place, and not, it's not just a pretend run, it's not just to have a name on a paper. It's a real serious run, and I appreciate that so much. And Darlene hit on this previously, but I wanted to give David and Rochelle a chance to weigh in, and that's the impact that the Dobbs decision has had in your state and in your race. Do you feel like that has sort of changed the strategy that you have, or do you feel like there is more of a momentum because of that decision? And how is the best way that we can build upon that?
Sure. Can I go first this time?
Yes, I was gonna tell you to go first, David.
So honestly, I think it's been a huge advantage to us as far as momentum goes. People are really upset and mad, and I will give you a really great example. In 2020, I ran for the state legislature. And when I went to the 4th of July parade here in Idaho Falls, our float was directly behind the Republican float. Their float got tons of cheering, and we just got booed through the entire parade route. And it was extremely deflating. It made you just wonder, why do you even bother? This year, we were actually in front of the Republican float, and we still had a fair amount of booing, but I would say it was overwhelmingly at least 80% cheering, people coming out, giving us high fives, fist bumps. What would really crack me up is you would see women out on the sidewalk to shake our hands and cheer for us, and the men sitting in their lawn chairs like this. And I think that, looking at the numbers since the Dobbs decision, everybody's been looking at gender gap in voter registration. And Idaho is second only to Kansas in that gender gap. We're almost 20% increase in female registration. We're also seeing huge increases in young people registration, the 18 to 24. I have really run my campaign differently than what traditional Democrats run in Idaho. Traditionally, Democrats run as trying to attract moderate Republicans. And so we don't talk about things like immigration. We don't talk about abortion. We don't talk about guns. We don't talk about LGBT issues. And so we've really, in my campaign, leaned into all of these issues, and we're seeing a tremendous impact. I spoke at a rally on Friday. There was hundreds of people there. That was a pro-choice rally. And so it really is giving an issue in these extremist states. It's giving an issue for people to get united behind in a way that we've really struggled as Democrats to do. So I think it's making a huge difference.
Yeah, if I can jump in. Yeah, I would agree that it is making a big difference. So I was actually 9 weeks pregnant when the 6-week abortion ban went into effect here in Texas, where they had a bounty mechanism to enforce that law, and anyone who aided or abetted somebody getting an abortion after 6 weeks would be sued by private citizens. And it just was very clear for me. I mean, I'm a civil rights lawyer. I've focused most of my career on fighting for reproductive rights, and had that case that y'all mentioned earlier where I defended a young teen who needed access to abortion care, and it's one of those things that I cannot hide from, and I would never want to hide from. I think that reproductive rights is so absolutely fundamental to equality, especially for women and people who can get pregnant. I think that it is at the forefront of everyone's mind, and Texas has just been so extreme with what they've done. This trigger ban that went into effect outlaws abortion totally, and it criminalizes doctors, where they would go to prison for life if they perform an abortion. And it empowers the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, to collect a $100,000 fine. I mean, the situation is so dire that, Ken Paxton, added more fuel to the fire by suing the Biden administration that tried to protect people through EMTALA, and at least make it possible for doctors to provide life-saving care to folks who need an abortion in an emergency situation in red states. And what happened? Ken Paxton was like, no, we're not gonna allow that. And so he used his power to challenge that, and he won a temporary injunction. So abortion access is completely outlawed in Texas, and I think that people are waking up and really understanding what that means. That means if you are miscarrying, or if you have an ectopic pregnancy, you're going to have a really hard time having a doctor treat you in Texas. So people are already experiencing situations where they're being forced to carry a non-viable pregnancy to the point where they're becoming septic before they can actually be treated. So it's absolutely dire. And I have been unabashedly pro-choice from the very beginning, and running this campaign with that front and center, because I have a daughter, and I want to make sure that she has as more rights than I did growing up. And there's no way to make that possible if we don't win these races. So I just want to also acknowledge everyone else here who is running in a red state and being so honest and forthcoming about their positions on choice. It's absolutely going to be on the ballot this November. I know what we saw in Kansas, it was a ballot measure, but I think that people have woken up and seen the extremism, and they went too far. And so we're going to see that reflected in what happens in November, because people are not going to vote for Republicans come November, because they know that a vote for a Republican is a vote against their healthcare. It's a vote against choice, and they're not going to stand for that.
If I can jump in and just add a little bit, I have a story around this. Actually, we had just left a parade, my son and I, and we had our campaign t-shirts on, and we walked into a Costco to do some shopping, and a young lady looked at our t-shirts, and she came over to me and she said, "Are you a Democrat?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And I introduced myself, and she said, "Oh, okay, good, because I've been looking for Democrats because of what's just happened with the Supreme Court decision." So absolutely, absolutely, Democrat should and can run on this, and people are voting on this. I think when it comes to Republican lawmakers, I don't think they ever thought the Supreme Court would follow through with overturning Roe. I hate to say overturning because it's not actually accurate. Pushing it to the states is more accurate. I don't think they ever thought it was going to happen. I don't even think they wanted it to happen. It was one of those wedge issues that they were able to mobilize their voters behind, and those one issue voters came out every single election cycle to vote on that one issue. And now that since the Supreme Court has done this and they've fulfilled this promise that they may have thought they wanted to do, I think Ms. McConnell is saying, oh crap, to be honest about it. I don't think they ever really wanted the Supreme Court to do what it did because it was a way for them to get their voters out. But now Democrats can absolutely and should absolutely say they have just taken away your freedom. And now we have to fight back.
Thank you all for that perspective. I think you closed by talking about freedom. I think freedom is on the ballot this election. I think Americans are starting to really realize that, and that's why you see, some polls starting to look more dire for the Republicans. Obviously, reproductive freedom is critical. Another really important freedom that's on the ballot is our freedom to vote, and have that vote counted. And obviously, with the January 6th committee hearings happening, in the lead up to the election, and all of the sort of suppression bills that have been considered and passed by state legislatures and by executives and state governments, they're trying to do everything that they can to shut down democracy. And so this is an issue that people care about increasingly. It never used to appear on the what issues do you care about lists when polling, when polls were done. But now it is in the top echelons of issues that people care about. So I'm curious, obviously democracy is under attack in all three of these states. I guess what's happening, but more importantly, like, how are you messaging? Like, what have you found to be successful in terms of messaging about democracy, and juxtaposing yourself against your opponent, in your races? I'm really curious, and anybody hop in. I want to hear from all of you.
For me, I'm making sure that the people of Congressional District 4 remembers that Burgess Owens voted or did not vote to certify the Electoral College from the state of Pennsylvania. And he voted to essentially overturn a free and fair election and American democracy. We will be doing a lot more of this as we get closer to November, but it's myself and there's many other people in social media spaces also will not allow him to forget that, and will not allow the voters of Congressional District 4 to forget that. But I also think that with the January 6th committee hearings, we have to make sure that we connect those dots of what January 6th really was and what it was all about. Here in Utah, we also have a Senate race with Mike Lee, for instance, and Mike Lee was pivotal in making those phone calls right before the votes were to be certified in December. And connecting the dots of what Mike Lee was actually doing, I being a student of history myself, and every chance I get, I make the connection between what he was doing and what happened in 1877. and how that led to 87 years of Jim Crow segregation laws. What Mike Lee was doing was the same thing. Pushing it to the states would create this electoral college dispute. We have to teach history. I know we can't get too much into the weeds because, as Cornell Belcher once said, when Democrats get into the weeds, they lose. So we can't get too much into the weeds, but we have to tell people and show people why this was important, why we almost lost our democracy, and make the comparison even to how Cuba lost their democracy, because Cuba was a democratic republic at one time. That is what we're doing in our race, and we will continue to do all the way up to November.
Thanks, Darlene. Rochelle, do you want to?
Sure. So just to contextualize this, so the person I'm running against, Ken Paxton, the current Attorney General of Texas, was present on January 6th at the insurrection. So he spoke to the crowd. He filed a frivolous lawsuit to overturn the election, challenging the election results in different states, Pennsylvania being one of them, and is currently being sued by the State Bar of Texas over his law license because he did that and frivolously using Texas taxpayer money. Texans are actually paying his bill to defend his law license. It's about $40,000 at the moment. We are in a crisis. I mean, this last Texas legislative session that we had created much more restrictive laws around mail-in ballots. So we had hundreds and thousands of ballots thrown out because they didn't meet these very nitpicky requirements that were passed by the legislature. We also had people that were recently became citizens or had been citizens for more than 10 years pulled off the voter registration rolls because, the Secretary of State decided to do that. And you can guess who that disproportionately impacted: Latino communities, people of color across the state. And Ken Paxton has recently, actually last week, issued an opinion through his office, an official opinion to all of the elections officials across the state, saying anyone can look at the election results and count the ballots. So it doesn't matter who they are, and they can look at those ballots, including the day after the election. That is against state law that requires that the ballots be held properly and privately for 22 months. And it's also against federal law that is the same thing, 22 months. So there is a very clear concerted effort to undermine our election systems, to undermine voting. And so all of these elections absolutely matter. That's what I have been communicating to voters and letting them know that, look, Ken Paxton has a quote unquote voter integrity unit, but he has wasted millions of dollars and only closed 2 cases. We're having a harder time trying to vote, and that's all because of Ken Paxton. So letting voters know that I want to have a fully funded civil rights division where we're actually protecting the voter integrity, that we are ensuring that people don't get pulled off the rolls just, for any reason. And this office has the power to do so. It is an independent constitutional position that has so much power to protect Texan civil rights. And it will be the last stand for voting rights in the state of Texas. So those are the things that we are trying to communicate to folks. These elections just matter so much. And I just want folks to understand that it's important to pay attention to what's happening in your counties, in your cities, and in your counties, and in your state, because that's where all of these changes are being made. And that's how the game is being rigged against democracy. So pay attention and make sure you're voting for folks that that will uphold democracy.
Well said, David.
Yeah. So, boy, where to even start? One of the biggest ways that my opponent has really worked to sort of undermine democracy is, I think, in his judicial appointments, in the votes for his judicial appointments. We have a Supreme Court right now that was made up by three justices who had three justices added to it who really shouldn't have been there. One of them should have already been done under Obama. And the last one was rushed through right at the end. And Mike Crapo was in support of all of those justices and of those processes, and in the delay process in Merrick Garland's. And then when you look at how he voted in the most recent, with our newest justice, and afterwards, the comment that he made in writing was, she was probably qualified, but she was nominated by a Democrat, so I can't support her. And the idea that that is where we've gotten in our system, that means we're no longer trying to work together. We're no longer even trying to hide the fact that we're not working together. Instead, we're just going to be blatant and upfront about it, that it is in everything we do an us versus them. And I think that you get that a lot when you have somebody who arguably has the safest seat in the US Senate. He has absolutely no incentive to vote in the interests of Idahoans or to support democracy, because he feels his seat is safe and he can do whatever he wants. On our state level, as a general rule, Idaho has actually pretty fair and free elections. However, in this last legislative session, they really tried to change that. And one example that I often give when speaking is 102 years ago, when women were first given the right to vote, or at least I have to say a portion of women in this country were finally given the right to vote, because certainly not all women were. My grandmother was just shy of her 3rd birthday. And this past May, she voted in person for me in my May primary when I won the nomination. Idaho tried to pass laws last year that would have taken her right to vote away. She's almost 105 years old. And they were trying to create all of these restrictions. They wanted to stop students from voting. And so they were creating all of these new restrictions that you had to have either a lease or a deed or a mortgage in your name in order to vote. And that you had to have a public utility in your name in order to vote, which would eliminate the majority of most students from being able to vote. However, it also would eliminate many women in this state who have utilities only in their husband's name because of the way our laws are written. Also, it would have eliminated my grandmother because she lives with my mother. She doesn't have any of those things. And so to take her right to vote away arbitrarily because you're trying to specifically target a group of people, it's really egregious. We also had our voter initiative process, which our state legislatures have tried for years to eliminate our voter initiative process, which brought us Medicaid expansion when our legislature wouldn't act. It brought us campaign finance laws when our legislature wouldn't act. And so they tried to get rid of it. They actually did pass a law to get rid of it. And we sued. And I know that Rochelle mentioned that the Attorney General's office has had some successful defense of their laws. In Idaho, not so much. They pretty much always lose. In fact, I wrote an op-ed about it, and the Attorney General got mad at me because I pointed out that they very rarely win a case, and when they did, it was a case they were representing both sides. And so it just, we as a state are trying more and more to take away that the power of the voters, the power of our citizens. And I think that's one of the reasons that extremism really flourishes in Idaho, because there's no infrastructure to stand up against it. There aren't strong candidates. There's not a lot of funding or resources coming in. And so it makes it really easy for these extremist ideas to take root here, because no one's tending the garden, so to speak. And once it starts here, it spreads. So And I think somebody should add in there too, we have the Moore decision coming up in the Supreme Court. And I think we can all guess how this Supreme Court is going to vote. And that has the potential to change every single citizen in this country's voting rights, because that case, if decided the way it's likely to be decided, would say that those state legislatures, like in Idaho, like in Texas, where they didn't agree with their election results, if they had reason to believe that the elections were not accurate, they could just throw them out and instead replace it with their own opinion. And that's a really scary thought, that could be given to us by this Supreme Court. And then when you think about 30 state houses in this country are controlled by Republicans, it will be next to impossible to ever win an election again with that law in place. So there's a lot at stake.
Yeah, there is a lot of state. I know I've certainly seen some stuff that's given me hope lately. Watching mainstream media suddenly talk about, oh, look at, Dem chances, keeping the House. We're watching polling in places like Texas, where Beto and Rochelle are closing in. So let's kind of ask the final question, because, this has been a tough talk tonight, but what gives you guys hope? What is inspiring you guys to keep going? Who wants to take it first?
The young people. I have a team of young people working with me and who I meet on the campaign trail. They are motivated. They do know what's going on and how the 21st century looks too much like the 20th century when it comes to women's reproductive freedom, when it comes to voting rights, even when it comes to American democracy and what we mean by when we say we, the people. They are very in tune about what's happening with our LGBTQ community, what's happening with transgender students and being targeted. They get it, and they are showing up, and they are getting involved. One of the things that I've done on my campaign, I created this campaign called Pass the Baton, and telling the young people, we've had our Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we've had John Lewis, we've had Rosa Parks, Ida B. Wells. A lot of the work that have happened already, that we've stood on the shoulders of those who have come before us, and a lot of the work that they have done have been eradicated. Clarence Thomas sits in the seat of Thurgood Marshall and has completely eradicated the work of Thurgood Marshall. It is incumbent upon this new generation to find their Dr. Martin Luther King, to find their John Lewis, to find their Rosa Parks, to find their Dolores Huerta. It is incumbent upon them to take that baton and run the next leg of the race, because this is the world of which we are handing to them. And they're going to have to do that work because it's been taken away. So I am encouraged by the young people that they are paying attention and they get it and they are stepping up.
I think that's so true. One of the things I'm also really encouraged by is the young people that are stepping up, and even some of the older people. I'm seeing a lot of people who marched in the 60s and the 70s who are like, I thought we've already been through this, and now we're right back here again. And in our state, we have a lot of stuff going on about removing books and stuff from libraries and removing books from schools and subjects from teaching. And people are really pushing back against that. And at the rally the other night that I spoke at, I sort of ended my speech by saying, you know what, this is your opportunity to be one of those people, to be the person that they don't want you reading about, because this is our opportunity to stand up and say enough is enough. And many of us looked up to people like Martin Luther King Jr. or Rosa Parks or any number of people, and everybody kind of wonders, well, they were really amazing people. And what I like to remind people of is, you are an amazing person, and you have the opportunity to make that exact type of change. They were only one person, and so are you. So that's what gives me hope, is that people are getting involved. People who used to say, I'm not interested in elections, I don't get involved, now they're saying, oh, okay, actually I do. So that gives me hope, and that's what I'm excited about.
I will agree with both of those sentiments. I'm really hopeful by the change that we're seeing in red states. There are a lot of people that are working really hard at the local level to make change, and every single day. And even if the odds are against them, I feel that way about my own campaign. Someone like me is not supposed to run for statewide office. You know, I'm a Latina from the border. I'm a working person. And to be within 2 points of unseating Ken Paxton, to be the closest statewide race in the state of Texas, in the most winnable race for Democrats in almost 30 years, that gives me hope. It gives me hope that we can have a better future, and for our kids and for the state and for the country. Is if you can see change happen in Texas, that means it can be anywhere. You know, it's a humbling experience, but I know that we can do it, because I think that people are waking up, and they're not liking what they're seeing. They see their circumstances are not changing. The younger generation is Gen Z for change. Somebody mentioned that in the group chat. They have been working very hard to make sure they're engaging young folks, to get them involved, to go vote, and just to speak their minds. But change is coming. There is going to be a blue wave, and it is going to be unexpected. And I am so grateful to be a part of it.
Thank you. What a great way to close us out here. It's 59 past. We wanted to get to questions, but unfortunately we don't have time. David Roth, Darlene McDonald, Rochelle Garza, thank you so much for joining us. This has been really inspiring for me. And I know a lot of our DemCasters are, I'm in Portland, you know, but a lot of our DemCasters are blue dots in red districts or red states, but they're also amazing organizers. And there's nothing more invigorating for organizers than fantastic candidates to rally around. And you guys are all that. So thank you so much for inspiring us all, and best of luck.
Yes,
I think there's going to be some shocking revelations come November 9th. So
sounds great.
Thank you all.
Thank
And
you.
make sure to donate to all of our campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will,
Yeah.
you know, in addition to being all social media activists, we do all the other types of volunteerism too. So we will absolutely be pushing your links and trying to help amplify your messaging.
Thank you so much.
I'm about ready to knock
Thanks.
some doors, so I'll be calling Darlene soon. So
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
you.
thanks, guys.
Have a great night.
Bye.